I've been watching a lot of Masaki Kobayashi's films recently, and they all have this one thing in common, the exploration of power and corruption, and sometimes the downright exposing of those in authority. Now, he's made 22 films in his 80 years of life, which, in comparison to his classic contemporaries, is rather low. Akira Kurosawa and Yasujiro Ozu are held to such a high standard already that, well, I wanted to shine a light on what I consider to be a third pillar of Japanese cinema.
私はやっぱり黒沢先生にもお世話になりましたけど、私を見つけて俳優として見つけて、ここまで未だ現役の俳優でいられるのは小林正樹監督のおかげだと思っております。
All these classic Japanese directors show an incredible eye for shot composition and framing, and despite Kobayashi having a considerably smaller volume of production, he has no less an eye for that perfection. He has been noted for his meticulous detail when filming. He's known for painting and working on the sets himself. So I guess what I'm saying is, visually, he and his films are more than capable of holding their own.
"まあどっかの本の中で鬼の小林という言葉を使っていらっしゃいましたけれども、
こうやらせようと思ったら絶対やらせると、長い時間かかっても、例えば撮影にしても、もう一度、それが1日ワンカット1日かかる場合もございました。
I do believe that the very nature of Japanese architecture and interior design allows for those skills to flourish for any director. The natural symmetry and heavy focus on geometric lines plays a huge role in why their films look so aesthetically pleasing. Of course, I'm not saying that they lack skill, far from it. After all, architecture is static and can only get you so far in terms of a cinematic head start. No, these men choose where to shoot, what should be in that shot, how to shoot it. It's just an idea that I think isn't really discussed that much when analysing classic Japanese cinema, or any cinema for that matter. I guess my point is that no matter the shot of a gorgeous beach or a beautiful window or a long corridor, it's always going to look impressive. Of course, a masterful director with a great cinematographer can elevate that shot, but maybe you understand my thought process here. I think the Japanese style meshes so well with photography rules. The symmetry, how angular the design is, the geometric focus, with lines leading the eyes and drawing focus naturally to your subject. Maybe it sounds like I'm defending a renowned director that doesn't need to be defended.
初めてあれじゃないですか、松竹の国際映画祭での賞、あれベルス、
ベルス、
ね、サンジョルジュ賞とかね、お取りになられて、国際的な成果をこれで得られたと思うんですけど。まあ人間の条件。
あれはね、確か3部4部を取ってる時にそのニュースが入ってる。
If you will think of this more as a case study, the only point that I'm trying to make is that Kobayashi more than holds his own in terms of how he handles a camera. So what is it that distinguishes his work for me? The reason I fell in love with his films, the reason I actually felt compelled to make this video, was not only the gorgeous aesthetics, not only the movement and staging of his films, not only the original narratives and performances that he was able to obtain. What stuck with me after watching his films was the way that he weaves themes meticulously into these gorgeous pieces of cinema. The way that he questions society and those in power is not only interesting to watch, but also necessary. After the capitulation of Japan, society was rapidly moving on from their history, especially surrounding World War II. As a military man himself, I can imagine the frustration this could have yielded for Kobayashi. I'm reminded a little bit of Peter Jackson's They Shall Not Grow Old, how the veterans of World War I, coming back to society, felt a huge disconnect from their peers.
People never talked about the war. It was a thing that had no conversational value at all. Most people were absolutely disinterested.
When I got home, My father and my mother didn't seem the least interested in what had happened. They hadn't any conception of what it was like. And on occasions when I did talk about it, my father would argue points of fact that he couldn't possibly have known about because he wasn't there.
Every soldier I've spoken to has experienced the same thing. We were a race apart from the civilians.
The world carried on as usual, and society could not even begin to comprehend what they had just experienced. To feel such exhaustion and emotional anguish, for it all to be just over. For a man's life to be reduced to such little value. But I can imagine that Kobayashi could have experienced something like this.
人間の条件の場合は梶は小林監督だったっていうところが、
その共通点は非常にあります。だから結局監督から盗んだような感じもしますね。
お前は随分言いにくいことをはっきり言ったから俺も言おう。お前はアホだ。お前のおふくろがお前の戦士のために流す涙だな。どんな気持ちの涙か考えることもできんアホだ。今度の戦争で死ぬのは犬死にだよ。生きてればいつかお前にもそれが分かる時が来るだろう。
To stand against the grain and question the morals or corruption of those in power is an incredibly bold and brave decision, and the beauty in how he does this, I believe, comes in how delicately he explores such themes. Never once do you feel that he's insulting Japan, and never once do you feel that he hates his country. He's simply bringing forward his opinion to the screen, forward for a discussion.
上等兵殿は沖縄のことで我々に何も言ってくれませんでした。我々は精神的に強い刺激が必要なんであります。師匠の信念を叩き込んでほしいんです。お前は師匠の信念が飯よりも好きな男だったな。正直言うとな、俺は師匠の信念よりも女房の方がずっと好きなんだよ。
His characters are so real. You never have only one opinion, you always have characters on both sides of the coin. And they argue to the fullest at why they are right and why Kobayashi's protagonist is wrong. It's presented as honest and true to life. So, we can look to the shogun from Harakiri, having the frustration of being taken advantage of in a world that has already, in his eyes, been cruel enough to the samurai. But to explain this a little bit more, I'd like to draw from remarks All Quiet on the Western Front. Now, early on in this book, there is a discussion of class and authority, which I believe really helps clarify what I'm trying to get at. In situations of turmoil, be that through World War I or the collapse of the shogunate in Edo, Japan, there is always a difference in class. Who is affected and to what extent will be dependent on your class. The samurai, well, he's the soldier in the trench. He has first-hand experience of this societal collapse. He is poor, he's been cast aside by society. In Harakiri, he is burdened with his son's wife that is falling ill. He understands that in this new world, morals and the Bushido code are irrelevant. It has now become an internal battle of the prioritization of his own ideals.
血眼になってもいかんともしがたいのが当節。士官をあまりにも焦りすぎることはくれぐれも留意いたさねばなりませんな。いや、まことにお主の言う通り。士官さえ焦らねばこうして上役の顔を見るでもなし、誰に遠慮も気兼ねもいらず。
The clan, however, is still wealthy. How long that will last is another discussion, but they're doing okay. They are aware by proxy of the hard times that some samurai are under, of course, but they haven't experienced it firsthand. They don't need to question their belief system because it's still working. There's a reason we call it blissful ignorance. So when the clan leader is presented with an act that shows such disgrace and degradation to everything that the samurai believe, why would he not feel angry? He simply doesn't understand. Or, if we take a look at the human condition and the military establishment itself,
小原の自殺の原因は家庭の事情ではありません。 では何だというのか。お前はなかなかのお弁だ。言えんことはあるまい。何だというのか。答えろ。原因は軍隊であります。
Fighting for the cause that, right or wrong, they believe to be just. They believe to be in the best interest of Japan. They are fighting for their country, and they believe that with an immense passion. I think the old saying comes to mind that no one raindrop caused the flood, but can you really judge any of them? If they're to be told by our protagonist that the war efforts are pointless, then how do we explain the sheer amount of death, the separation of families, the mistreatment of the Chinese? You have to believe in your efforts, that all this suffering shall not be in vain, if not just to help you sleep at night.
沖縄が落ちても本土がある。250万の本土防衛軍が満を持して行幸を頼む時期はもう過ぎたというんだ。頼みやせん。賞賛なくして本土決戦の方策を立ってるんじゃない。誰しもがそう思いたいさ。どうにかしてくれるだろうという国民の期待のもとに現地軍は次々と玉砕している。それがありのままの姿だ。犬死にしてるというのか。見方によってはな。貴様、まあ落ち着け。純国の七気取りは兵隊の前だけでたくさんだ。大言損をする奴が壮烈果敢に戦うとは限らんのだよ。
Emperor Hirohito himself stated that we declared war on America and Britain out of our sincere desire to ensure Japan's self-preservation and the stabilization of East Asia, it being far from our thought either to infringe upon the sovereignty of other nations or to embark upon territorial aggrandizement. Now, of course, he would say that, but it does illustrate the altered state of mind you need to believe in what you are doing, at all costs. We look towards authority with respect. It implies further knowledge than your own. It implies experience and guidance, a deeper insight and a more humane wisdom, which, by the way, I don't see as necessarily a bad thing, not to mention the depression that Japan was facing at the time, a huge economic decline, and their need for resources from Manchuria to help get them out of it. And being specifically Manchuria, because they already had established railway lines built in the prior years. I'm not saying any of this is moral, just or right, but I am saying that Kobayashi, despite disagreeing to an immense degree, still offers this ideal with due diligence.
民族平等の原則を疑うのかい。小平殿ほど無邪気に信じないだけです。日本人は何をしました。侵略国から逃げ出したからって、それが思想潔白の証明なんかになりゃしないんだ。脱走兵でしかない。何を言いたいんだ。向こうの畑にきれいな花が咲いてるからって、こっちを捨ててっていいもんか。自分にはそれができないんです。
It is portrayed for the reality that it was. War films can often lose sight of the tragedy of war by focusing on the winners and the losers. If we watch any number of movies on World War II from an Allied perspective, we're likely to see the Germans and the Japanese as a faceless enemy, immoral and downright evil. And from a certain point of view, I do understand that, and it does definitely depend on the type of the movie that you're trying to make. But it doesn't do justice to history. It's why films like All Quiet on the Western Front, Paths of Glory, The Wind Rises, Das Boot, Downfall, Letters from Iwo Jima, Grave of the Fireflies, they all stand out. They tell stories from a fresh perspective about people who were living in a tragic time. They reveal more about war than just winners and losers.
Well, how do they start a war?
Well, one country offends another.
How could one country offend another? You mean there's a mountain over in Germany gets mad at a field over in France?
Well, stupid, one people offends another.
Oh, that's it. I shouldn't be here at all. I don't feel offended.
It don't apply to tramps like you.
Good. then I can be going home right away.
You just try it. You want to get shot?
Now, let's switch gears and go back to Samurai Rebellion. Before the final showdown, our protagonist is forced to fight with his friend, who is honor-bound and cannot allow him to pass on to Tokyo, even if he personally agrees that he should be able to. Or perhaps I could talk about those in the higher ranks that are pleading for him to listen and trade his wife. Now, you must remember that Japan during the Edo period was in peacetime, but how did this peace come to be? Well, it was led by the shogun, by military men, and they overthrew the emperor. Now, how does a military man maintain peace in a country? Well, how does he do that among the men in his ranks? He enforces order. Rules, regulations, traditions, customs upon customs. Rules outlining how to behave in one's house, how to be seated, what to wear, when to wear it, how to act in every kind of situation depending on location and your audience. As Dr. Peterson discusses in regards to an overabundance of rules within a society, it's more often than not that the said society will collapse, or in my mind, at least will create a breeding ground for characters such as ours in Harakiri and Samurai Rebellion.
So Christ is walking down the road on the Sabbath. There's a ditch by the road, and it's very hot. And in the ditch, there's a hole, and in the hole, there's a sheep. And this guy, shepherd, is trying to get the sheep out of the hole. And Christ walks by and he says, if you don't understand what you're doing, you're a transgressor of the law and you're cursed. But if you do understand what you're doing, then you're blessed.
With rules like this, and the longest peace, perhaps you don't question anything, because those laws, this way of living, has done so much. You are part of a machine that is working to the best of its ability. The Edo period shows such wonderful advancements in the arts. There is unification, and war is dwindling. So honestly, whatever it is, it's working. That time period is so far out of our grasp of understanding, it's very easy to sit back and critique. But that's what I'm saying. The antagonists may indeed be wrong, but they aren't displayed as stupid. Ignorant, lacking in empathy, maybe. Hypocritical, definitely. But their belief is shown fairly and as it was. It is firm and they stand by it, making them not just fantastic antagonists, but brilliant characters. And on that note,
you can distinguish in your head between villain and antagonist. It's sometimes helpful to split those two apart. Antagonist is someone that is working against the goals of the main character. Villain is someone who is doing expressly evil things. Those are my definitions. You don't have to use them.
Now, if we go back to the high-ranking samurai, in terms of their loyalty, commitment, and honor to each other and to the system that they believe, you can visualize why and how they exist, and how they came to have their point of view. Now, Japan as a society, especially in feudal Japan, can be imagined as a series of cogs. Of course, they're all individually important, but the focus is on the sum of those parts. You marvel at the watch, not at each individual cog inside. Each cog has a duty and a function, so that the watch can tell the time. If one cog decided that they wanted to do something against the grain, well then, the watch no longer works. Now, keeping that in mind and watching Kobayashi's movies, you really feel the frustration of an idealist trapped inside this world. You can feel the pain of believing that the society you live in and love is headed in the wrong direction. Not to mention, the protagonist we are following is often stuck in the depths of this bureaucratic system, a slave to their duty and powerless to change it. His protagonists are also not the epitome of all things good either. In fact, they're often very flawed, especially when you view how they behave to their significant others or the rash decisions that they make out of desperation. But I believe the point is to bring to light the flaws of such an authoritarian government. Not to have a shining beacon of light that is without fault. They are still victims of the world that they live in. The failures of greed and corruption of those in power creates a world in which your average person has very different morals to you or I. It's such a powerful tool for storytelling to have an authoritarian government undermine the will of humanity's desire to be free, or, at the very least, a comfortable freedom that we are willing to compromise on.
The war is not meant to be won. It is meant to be continuous. The essential act of modern warfare is the destruction of the produce of human labor. A hierarchical society is only possible on the basis of poverty and ignorance.
In post-World War II Japan, a censorship law was imposed upon Japanese media by the US that lasted strictly from 1945 until 1948, and loosely until the end of Allied occupation in 1952. This was the SCAP, or the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers. This was an official title held by one Douglas MacArthur, but eventually evolved to become the name of the organisation. The goal was to suppress any idealization of militaristic nationalism, to remove any positive thoughts about feudal Japan and militarization, which ironically was viewed by some Japanese politicians as the new dawn of feudal Japan. Albeit that this was in the beginning of his career, but Kobayashi was working as a director during this time. Their censorship of art undoubtedly affected him. His films criticised Japan, yes, to an extent, but more importantly they criticised authority. World War II, especially being told from a Japanese perspective, was, and to an extent still is, a very touchy subject. Kobayashi definitely knew that, but I think that pushed him to do it even more. Not to mention that the human condition was only greenlit in the first place because Kobayashi actually threatened to resign. One of his earlier works, The Thick-Walled Room, was withheld from release until 1956 due to fears of offending both Japanese and American authorities. This movie discusses the lower-level soldiers that were imprisoned due to their war crimes. It points the finger, however, to the unjust nature of low-level soldiers being imprisoned while high-ranking officers received little to no punishment, and we don't have to look too far to know what he was talking about. Many of you may have heard of Unit 731, a ghastly division of the Japanese military. Their focus was on the development and research into biochemical warfare, human experimentation, not limited to live vivisections, on Chinese prisoners. This is the division that is responsible for weaponizing the plague and dropping its spores across Manchukuo to infect civilians and to be spread throughout communities. I bring this up because the head surgeon of this division, Shiroishi, was released on American authority. The Soviets wanted to press charges, but he was able to negotiate through medical professionals in the US, them claiming that the research he found was invaluable due to it not being possible to attain in America, as it was frowned upon to experiment on humans.
大体マルタっていうのは一般のマルタ、木のマルタですね。人間とも思わなかったんではないかと思いますよ。
Ishii lived out a full life and died of cancer at 67 in Tokyo. Yet grunt soldiers were being trialled and locked away for war crimes against humanity. There was a clear injustice happening in who was being punished and for what crime. Kobayashi made a film to expose and discuss that fact. He also served in World War II, being stationed in Manchuria. It's very easy to understand why he connected so well with Junpei's work. It's said that Kobayashi was, much like Koji, a pacifist during his time in the war, refusing to be promoted above the rank of private. His last days in the war were spent as a POW in Okinawa. Prior to the war, Kobayashi was an art student but decided to take up filming during World War II. He was of the opinion that cinema was a more urgent medium for a time of crisis. And, well, what does he mean by this? The optimist in me is saying that he was talking about raising people's spirits, boosting the morale of the Japanese people during times of struggle, an escape from reality that they were facing. But of course his first films were made post-World War II, and they were not exactly shining beacons of hope and escapism. But if we are talking about the importance of cinema during wartime, perhaps he was talking more literally. We should look towards what actually happened in Japan. And like Hollywood, Japanese cinema had a well of potential for government propaganda during wartime. In 1939, a film law was passed to allow for a much more government-restricted film industry, shifting the authority to the state. The government pushed for realism through documentary films, and also the glory of the Japanese Empire through propaganda films. The mindset of the Japanese people during this time was shifting towards kokudai, or national polity. Now this was supposed to be a push back towards the roots of Japanese nationalism, back towards seeing the emperor as a descendant of the sun god, and that the Japanese populace should surrender their utmost loyalty to Japan at all costs. This was being pushed alongside the growing anti-Western ideologies of this time by those in power. After the mistreatment and inequalities of Japanese citizens abroad, and also of Japan's desire to expand its nation into Asia, most notably through Manchuria, which was being constantly refused by the League of Nations, Japan withdrew from the League due to what they saw as a huge hypocrisy on the part of the Western world.
第一には絶対服従の精神であります。命令された任務はあくまでもやり抜く精神であります。なぜか命令は賢くも大元帥陛下より下されたものであります。よし、次を中川練習せ。はい。攻撃精神であります。勝つまではどこまでも食い下がって死んだ後までも粘り抜く関東精神であります。よし。次を山田練習生。はい。犠牲的精神であります。自分を犠牲にして全体の目的を遂げなさる精神であります。よし。皆いずれも将来飛行兵となるに格べからなる精神である。
Pre-war Kobayashi landed an apprenticeship at the Sochiku studio, where after working for a few months, he was conscripted into the Japanese army in Manchuria. He spent his last year of the war at a prisoner of war camp in Okinawa. He described this time as the culmination of human evil. These experiences were of direct influence for his Human Condition trilogy, his own odyssey, if you will. An epic saga of a man sent to war, fighting against unfathomable odds to get home to his loved ones, learning of good and evil along the way. We witness a man change through the horrors of war, while simultaneously witnessing the might of human persistence. His life and his movies are very much a call and response. He tells them so brutally honestly, as he lived it, and pointing a finger towards the system that is broken. As a result of this, as is in reality, his movies do not always end as one might be anticipating or hoping. The Human Condition, Samurai Rebellion and Harakiri all have incredibly bleak endings. Our characters fight with everything they have, but in the end they fail. In The Human Condition, we have the torment of seeing this 9-hour epic for him to collapse in the snow, dead, away from his home and dreaming of his wife. Samurai Rebellion shows a heartbreaking defeat. He fails, and in his final breaths, he cannot find his granddaughter. She is going to be raised in the hands of those her grandfather opposed. She'll never know his life story. Life will continue as it was. Nevermore is this more present than in Harakiri. After a glorious showdown and a wonderful act of revenge, our character is overwhelmed. Kobayashi then stabs the knife in our backs to show the clan cleaning the bodies to remove any evidence of what has just happened.
他に手いた傷を負った者が8名。 芸州老嗣も半四郎は切腹。家中の者はすべて病死である。は食い詰め浪人の刃に倒れ、または傷つくような者遠い家には一人としておらん。
I like Jung's quote that no tree can reach heaven without having its roots in hell, that it is natural or perhaps inevitable that when the pendulum swings so far in one direction, it'll cause an equal and opposite reaction. Perhaps maybe the point is not that they failed, and not whether they changed or will change anything. It's simply that they exist, that a version of them will always exist. His films are stories of rebellion, but their existence is also an act of defiance in their own right. They're a caution and a memory. His characters never waver, they fight until their last breaths, and maybe that is enough, narratively speaking. It's certainly more true to life. They are martyrs. There is a reason that we always root for the underdog. We want them to succeed so badly, and depending on your perspective, well, they do succeed. Maybe they didn't overthrow the government, but they stood up for themselves against all odds and revealed the cracks in the walls. It is genius that his characters, these stories, Kobayashi's own opinion of the world, are in a lot of ways very defeatist and about failures of those in power, the failures of societal systems. But he spins this attitude into an act of defiance, and therefore a glimmer of hope. I think Kobayashi is a remarkable filmmaker, and I think he's made some movies that will be remembered forever. If ever you want to take a deep dive into Japanese history without any rose-tinted glasses, then I sincerely hope that you check out some of his movies after watching this video. But for now, I appreciate your time.